3 hikers vanished without a trace, but they were never found dead. Deep in the Appalachian woods, a hidden cabin, a man who never ages, and a chilling secret suggest something far worse: some victims don't disappear, they're kept. And what Sheriff Boone saw in those trees was so terrifying, it was erased from history. Stay with us, because the deeper this story goes, the more it proves some places are never meant to be found. In the early 1900s, deep within the Appalachian Mountains, there was a stretch of forest that didn't behave like the rest. The mountains were already known for their thick woods, winding paths, and quiet isolation, but this place felt different. Even seasoned hunters avoided it. Locals didn't give it a proper name, they simply called it that side of the ridge. It wasn't marked on maps. In fact, older maps showed a logging trail running through that area, but newer ones didn't. It was as if the trail had been erased, not just forgotten. Still, people talked. They said if you walked long enough in those woods, you might find it, the missing trail. A narrow path lined with tall, leaning trees that blocked out most of the light. The ground there felt softer, almost hollow, like it had been disturbed too many times. And if you listened closely, you might hear something echoing in the distance. Not an animal. Not the wind. Something heavier. Thunk. Then silence. Most people who claimed to find the trail turned back quickly. They described a strange feeling, like being watched from all directions. Some said the air felt thick, hard to breathe. Others swore the trees seemed closer together than they should be, bending inward as if they were closing in. But not everyone came back. Over the years, there were quiet stories of people disappearing near that part of the forest. A hunter who never returned home. A pair of travelers whose wagon was found abandoned near the edge of the woods. A young boy who wandered off chasing a deer and was never seen again. At first, these incidents were dismissed. The mountains were dangerous. People got lost. Animals attacked. It wasn't unusual. But then came the summer of 1912. 3 young hikers, Thomas Hale, Richard Dunning, and Samuel Pike, set out for a week-long trip through the Appalachians. They were experienced, well-prepared, and familiar with the terrain. Friends and family weren't worried when they left. But after 10 days passed with no word, concern began to grow. A small search group was organized, made up of local men who knew the mountains well. They followed the hikers' planned route and found signs of their journey: footprints, broken branches, a discarded tin can. Then, just beyond a narrow ridge, they found the campsite. At first glance, everything seemed normal. A fire pit sat in the center, still filled with ash. Their tents were set up properly. Blankets lay folded near their sleeping spots. Supplies were arranged neatly, as if the men had planned to stay another night. But something felt wrong. The fire hadn't been properly put out, yet it hadn't spread either. It was as if time had stopped the moment they left. Their boots were placed beside the tents. All 3 pairs. That detail didn't make sense. No one walks barefoot through the Appalachian wilderness. Not willingly. The searchers called out their names, expecting a response, but the forest remained silent. No movement. No voices. Not even birds. Then one of the men noticed something unusual. A tree stood just a few yards from the campsite, its trunk marked with deep cuts. At first, they thought it was normal logging work, but the pattern wasn't right. The marks weren't practical. They weren't made to cut the tree down. They formed shapes. Letters. The men moved closer, brushing their hands against the rough bark. The cuts were fresh, too fresh. Whoever made them hadn't been gone long. Carved into the tree, in large uneven strokes, was a single word. Stay. The group exchanged uneasy glances. Some laughed nervously, trying to brush it off as a prank or a coincidence. But no one truly believed that. Because just below that word, there were more markings. Not letters. Not symbols anyone recognized. They looked almost like faces, twisted, stretched, barely human. And beneath those, smaller carvings that resembled bones or branches intertwined. One of the older men in the group stepped back, shaking his head. He muttered something under his breath, something about old stories he'd heard as a child. Stories about a man in the woods. A woodsman who didn't leave. A woodsman who didn't age. A woodsman who took people. The searchers tried to stay focused. They spread out, looking for tracks or signs of movement. But the ground around the campsite was strangely undisturbed. No footprints leading away. No signs of struggle. It was as if the three hikers had simply vanished into thin air. As the sun began to set, the group gathered back at the campsite. The forest seemed darker now, even before night fully fell. The trees cast long shadows that stretched unnaturally across the ground. Then came the sound. Faint at first. So faint that one man thought he imagined it. Thunk. Everyone froze. They listened carefully. Silence. Then again. Thunk. It echoed from somewhere deep within the forest. Slow. Steady. Heavy. Not random. Deliberate. One of the men whispered, "That's an axe." No one argued. The sound came again, slightly louder this time. Thunk. The group stood still, unsure of what to do. Some wanted to follow it. Others insisted they leave immediately. But before any decision could be made, the sound stopped. And the forest went completely quiet. Too quiet. No wind. No insects. No distant animal calls. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels wrong. That night, none of them slept. And by morning, one of the searchers was gone. Just like the hikers. No footprints. No struggle. Only one thing left behind. A new carving on the same tree. This time, it wasn't a word. It was a shape. Tall. Broad. With something in its hand. An axe. The disappearance of one of their own changed everything. What had started as a search mission quickly turned into something else, something heavier, darker. The men no longer spoke with confidence. Their voices dropped. Their movements slowed. Even the most experienced among them avoided looking too long at the tree with the carvings. By sunrise, fear had settled into the group like a thick fog. Some wanted to leave immediately, arguing that they had done enough. But others insisted they couldn't abandon the missing, especially now that one of their own had vanished without a trace. That's when Sheriff Elias Boone arrived. Boone wasn't a man easily shaken. He had dealt with violent crimes, long hunts, and dangerous men. But as he stepped into the campsite and listened to what the others described, his expression grew serious in a way they hadn't seen before. He examined the tents, the untouched supplies, and the boots left behind. He ran his fingers over the carvings on the tree, pausing at the word "stay." Then he looked at the forest. Quiet. Watching. Boone made a decision. They would continue the search, but carefully, and together. He began keeping a journal that same morning, writing down everything they saw. Every detail mattered now. Day 1, Boone's journal. The men are nervous. I can't blame them. One gone without a sound. No tracks. No signs. This isn't normal. The carvings on the tree, fresh. Someone is here. Watching us, maybe. I intend to find out who. They moved deeper into the forest, following the direction where the strange axe sound had come from the night before. The path wasn't clear, but there were signs, broken twigs, faint depressions in the soil, and once or twice, a mark on a tree that looked deliberate. Hours passed. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees grew taller and closer together. Their branches twisted in unnatural shapes, blocking out sunlight until the ground below was dim and gray. The air felt colder, even though it was still summer. At one point, one of the men swore he heard whispering. Another claimed he saw movement between the trees, something large, just out of sight. Boone kept them moving. "Stay focused," he said. "We follow the signs. Nothing else." But even he couldn't ignore the feeling that they were no longer alone. It was late afternoon when they found it. At first, it looked like nothing more than a shadow between the trees. But as they got closer, the shape became clearer. A cabin. It stood low and wide, built from dark, aged wood. The structure looked old, very old, but not abandoned. The walls were solid. The roof was intact. And from the chimney, a thin line of smoke drifted into the air. The men stopped. No one spoke for several seconds. "Someone's living here," one of them finally said. Boone nodded slowly. "Stay alert," he replied. "We go in together." The door creaked as Boone pushed it open. Inside, the cabin was dim but not dirty. In fact, it was the opposite. Everything was organized. Too organized. Tools lined the walls, axes of different sizes, saws, knives, and other instruments the men couldn't immediately identify. Each one was clean. Polished. Sharp enough to reflect the faint light coming through the windows. There was a table in the center of the room, completely empty except for a single object. An axe. Larger than the others. Its blade gleamed unnaturally, as if it had just been cleaned. Boone approached it carefully but didn't touch it. "Where's the owner?" one of the men whispered. No one answered. Because there was no sign of anyone living there. No food. No cooking supplies. No personal items like clothing or bedding. Just tools. And silence. Boone began writing again. Day 2, Boone's journal. Cabin found. Hidden well. Whoever built it knows the forest. Inside is wrong. No signs of living, yet the place is maintained. Tools are spotless. No dust. No decay. It feels like a workspace, not a home. As they searched the cabin, one of the men called out. "There's something here." He was standing near the back corner, where a rug lay flat on the wooden floor. When he pulled it aside, they saw a metal ring embedded in the boards. A handle. Boone stepped forward and grabbed it. "Help me," he said. Two men joined him, and together they lifted. The wooden panel opened with a long, low creak, revealing a dark space below. A trapdoor. A narrow set of steps led down into darkness. For a moment, no one moved. Then Boone lit a lantern. "I'm going down," he said. "Stay close." The air below was colder. Thicker. It smelled faintly of damp wood, and something else. Something they couldn't place. The lantern light flickered as they reached the bottom, revealing a cramped underground room. Wooden boxes were stacked along the walls. Dozens of them. Each one carefully sealed. Boone approached the nearest box and knelt down. "Open it," he said quietly. One of the men hesitated, then pried it open with a knife. Inside. Clothes. Folded neatly. A hat. A pair of gloves. And a small leather journal. Boone picked up the journal, flipping through its pages. Names. Dates. Entries that ended suddenly. He felt a chill run down his spine. "Open the others," he ordered. They did. And each one told the same story. Personal belongings. Different styles. Different ages. Men. Women. Even children. All carefully stored. All labeled in small carvings on the inside of the lids. Dates going back years. Decades. One of the men stumbled backward, shaking his head. "This isn't right," he said. "This isn't right at all." "No," Boone replied quietly. "It isn't." "But where are the bodies?" No one had an answer. That night, they stayed in the cabin. They didn't want to, but darkness had already fallen, and the forest outside felt worse than the place they were in. They took turns keeping watch. No one slept. The silence pressed in around them. Then, sometime after midnight, they heard it. From outside. Slow. Heavy. Close. Thunk. The sound of an axe striking wood. Right outside the cabin. The men froze. Another strike. Thunk. Closer now. Then footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Circling the cabin. No one dared move. No one dared speak. Then the sound stopped. The footsteps faded. And silence returned. At dawn, they stepped outside. The forest looked the same. But one of the men was missing. Gone. Without a trace. Just like the others. Boone didn't need to check the ground. He already knew what he wouldn't find. No footprints. No struggle. Nothing. Only the quiet cabin behind them. And the feeling that something had come in the night and taken what it wanted. By the third morning, the forest no longer felt like a place, it felt like a trap. Sheriff Elias Boone stood outside the cabin, staring at the empty space where another man should have been. No signs. No sound. No trace of what had happened during the night. The remaining men looked at him, waiting for an answer he didn't have. "We leave," one of them said firmly. His voice shook, but his decision didn't. "We've lost too many already." A few others nodded quickly. But Boone didn't respond right away. His eyes moved slowly across the trees, scanning the shadows, the spaces between trunks, the places where something, or someone, could be watching. Then he spoke. "If we run without knowing what we're dealing with," he said quietly, "we won't make it out." Silence followed. No one argued, but no one felt reassured either. Finally, Boone made a compromise. "One more day," he said. "We stay together. We find something, anything, that explains this. Then we leave." Reluctantly, the others agreed. But deep down, each man knew something had already gone too far. They spent the day searching the area around the cabin. At first, it seemed pointless. The forest gave them nothing, no tracks, no broken branches, no signs of movement. But as the hours passed, they began to notice small details. Cuts on tree bark. Not random. Not natural. They were deliberate, just like the carvings near the campsite. Some were simple lines. Others formed shapes, crooked patterns that seemed almost like symbols. And a few looked like human figures. One of the men pointed to a tree and stepped back. "Look at that," he whispered. The others gathered around. Carved into the trunk was a tall shape with long arms. In one hand, it held something heavy. An axe. But that wasn't what made their skin crawl. It was what stood behind the figure. Smaller shapes. Many of them. Standing still. Watching. Boone wrote in his journal again, though his handwriting had become less steady. Day 3, Boone's journal. The carvings are everywhere. Not just near the cabin. They mark the trees like a path, or a warning. Some show a man. Others show followers. I cannot explain it, but it feels like we are being led somewhere. Or watched as we move. As evening approached, the men returned to the cabin. No one spoke much anymore. The air felt heavier than before, pressing down on them with every breath. Even the light seemed weaker, fading faster than it should. They secured the door and covered the windows as best they could. No one suggested going outside after dark. Boone took the first watch. He sat near the window, rifle resting across his lap, eyes fixed on the forest beyond. The others lay close together, trying to rest, though sleep didn't come easily. For a while, everything was still. Too still. Then, just before dawn, it began. Thunk. Boone's eyes snapped open. The sound came from deep in the forest. Heavy. Measured. Thunk. Another strike. Closer this time. Boone stood slowly, gripping his rifle. The sound continued. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Each strike echoed through the trees, steady and unhurried. Not the frantic chopping of a worker, but something slower. Intentional. Almost patient. Boone glanced at the others. They were awake now too, eyes wide, breathing shallow. No one moves, Boone whispered. But he knew he wouldn't follow his own order. Minutes passed. The sound didn't stop. It only grew closer. Finally, Boone made his decision. "I'm going to look," he said. "No," one of the men replied quickly. "Don't go out there." Boone didn't argue. He simply opened the door. The cold air hit him immediately. The forest was covered in a thin layer of fog, low to the ground, drifting slowly between the trees. And the sound, thunk, was close now. Very close. Boone stepped forward, moving carefully, each foot placed with purpose. The men inside the cabin watched him disappear into the fog. Then he was alone. The deeper he went, the quieter everything became. No insects. No wind. Not even the sound of his own footsteps seemed to carry. Only the axe. Thunk. Boone followed it. Step by step. Tree by tree. Until suddenly, it stopped. Boone froze. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It felt like something had just noticed him. Slowly, he raised his rifle and turned. That's when he saw him. The figure stood between two trees, partially hidden by fog. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Still. At first, Boone thought it was just a man. But the longer he looked, the more something felt wrong. The man's posture was too rigid. His head tilted slightly, as if studying Boone in return. His clothes were rough, stitched together from uneven pieces of fabric and animal hide. And his beard, long, tangled, almost blending into his chest. But it was his eyes that made Boone's breath catch. They reflected no light. Just darkness. The woodsman held an axe in one hand. Not raised. Not ready to strike. Just resting at his side. Waiting. Boone tried to speak. "Who are you?" he called out. His voice sounded weak in the open air. The men didn't respond. Didn't move. Didn't blink. He simply stared. Then, slowly, the woodsman lifted his axe. Boone tightened his grip on the rifle, heart pounding. But the axe didn't swing. Instead, the men extended it outward. Pointing. Not at Boone. But behind him. A cold feeling ran through Boone's body. He didn't want to turn around. Every instinct told him not to. But something stronger forced him. Slowly. Carefully. He looked. At first, he saw nothing. Just fog. Then shapes began to form. Figures. Standing still between the trees. 1. 2. 3. More. Boone's heart dropped. He recognized them. The missing hikers. The searchers who had vanished. Even the men from the night before. They were all there. Standing upright. Unmoving. Their faces pale. Their eyes empty. They weren't dead. But they weren't alive either. Boone stumbled back, his breath coming fast now. What is this?" he whispered. No one answered. When he turned back toward the woodsman, he was gone. No sound. No movement. Just gone. The figures in the trees didn't follow. They didn't move at all. They simply stood there. Watching. Waiting. Boone didn't stay. He turned and ran. Branches scratched his arms. Roots caught his feet. But he didn't stop. He burst through the cabin door moments later, gasping for air. The men rushed toward him. "What did you see?" one asked. Boone couldn't answer right away. His hands trembled. His eyes wide. Finally, he spoke. "He's not alone," Boone said. Outside, deep in the forest. The sound returned. Thunk. Slower now. Heavier. Closer than ever. And this time, it didn't stop. Boone's words settled over the cabin like a shadow. He's not alone. No one asked him to explain further. They didn't need to. The look on his face said enough. Whatever he had seen out there in the trees had broken something inside him, something steady, something certain. The men gathered closer together, their fear no longer hidden. One of them barred the door with a wooden beam. Another covered the small window with a blanket, as if that could keep whatever was outside from seeing in. But it didn't feel like enough. Nothing did. The sound continued. Thunk. A pause. Thunk. It came from somewhere beyond the cabin, slow and steady, echoing through the forest like a heartbeat that didn't belong to anything living. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, one of the men, Jacob Mercer, the youngest in the group, shifted nervously and broke the silence. "We need to leave," he said. His voice cracked, but he forced himself to continue. "Right now. Before it gets dark again." Another man shook his head. "And go where? You think this forest is going to let us walk out after what we've seen?" "That thing out there is just a man," Jacob insisted, though even he didn't sound convinced. "A man with an axe. We outnumber him." "No," Boone interrupted. His voice was low, firm. "That's not just a man." The room fell quiet again. Boone sat down heavily at the table, rubbing his face with both hands. For a moment, he said nothing, as if he were trying to find the right words, or decide whether the truth would help at all. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. "I saw them," he said. "The missing ones. All of them. They're still out there." Jacob frowned. "What do you mean, still out there? Are they alive?" Boone hesitated. "I don't know what they are," he admitted. "But they're not free. They're standing in those woods like they're waiting for something." "For what?" someone whispered. Boone looked toward the door. "For him." The axe struck again outside. Thunk. Closer now. Closer than before. The men flinched as one. "That's it," Jacob said, backing away from the door. "We can't stay here." But before anyone could argue, another voice spoke up. It was Thomas Reed, the oldest among them, a quiet man who had said very little since the search began. Now, he looked pale. Shaken. And afraid. "There's something I didn't tell you," Reed said. All eyes turned to him. Boone straightened. "What is it?" Reed swallowed hard. "When I was a boy," he began, "my grandfather used to tell stories about this part of the forest. I always thought they were just tales to scare children, but now He trailed off, glancing toward the walls, as if the carvings themselves might be listening. "Go on," Boone said. Reed nodded slowly. "He said there was once a logger who lived out here. A man who worked deeper in the forest than anyone else. He was strong, stubborn, and greedy." The word hung in the air. "One winter," Reed continued, "the supplies ran low. Food ran out. Other loggers left the area, but this man refused. He believed the forest owed him something, for all the work he'd done, all the trees he'd taken." "That's foolish," Jacob muttered. Reed ignored him. "My grandfather said the men went into the woods one night and called out, begging for help. Promising anything in return." The room grew colder. "And something answered him." No one moved. No one even breathed too loudly. Reed's voice dropped to a whisper. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything you could see clearly. But it spoke to him, and it made him a deal. Boone leaned forward slightly. "What kind of deal?" Reed closed his eyes for a moment before answering. "It promised he would never starve again. Never grow weak. The forest would provide for him, always." "That doesn't sound like a curse," Jacob said quickly. Reed opened his eyes. "It does when you hear the rest." Outside, the axe struck again. Thunk. In return, Reed said, the men had to give something back. Not wood. Not animals. His voice shook now. People. Silence. Heavy. Unbreakable. "No," Jacob said, backing away. "That's just a story." Reed shook his head. "My grandfather said," the men agreed. "At first, he resisted, but the forest made sure he kept his promise. It twisted him. Changed him. Made him something else." Boone's jaw tightened. "The woodsman," he said quietly. Reed nodded. "And over time, he stopped being human. He became part of the forest. Bound to it. Feeding it." The realization spread through the room like a slow, creeping cold. "That's impossible," one of the men whispered. But no one truly believed that anymore. Not after what they had seen. "The ones he takes," Boone said slowly, thinking out loud. "They don't die." Reed looked at him. "No," he said. "They become part of it too. Trapped. Like roots beneath the ground. Still there. Still connected." Boone's mind raced. The figures in the trees. The empty eyes. The stillness. "They're not followers," he said. "They're prisoners." The axe struck again. Thunk. Right outside the cabin now. Everyone froze. The sound of footsteps followed. Slow. Heavy. Circling the cabin. Jacob grabbed a rifle, his hands shaking violently. "We can fight him," he said. "We have to." Boone didn't respond. Because deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't something you could fight. The footsteps stopped. Right at the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. No movement. No sound. Then, a shadow passed beneath the door. Someone gasped. Another man stepped back, nearly dropping his weapon. The door creaked slightly under a sudden pressure. Not forced. Not broken. Just tested. Then silence again. Minutes passed. No one could tell. Finally, pressure broke. Footsteps slowly. The sound didn't disappear. It continued. Thunk. Thunk. Fading into the distance. No one spoke for a long time. Then, quietly, Boone said, "He's not hunting us." The others looked at him. "Then what is he doing?" Jacob asked. Boone stared at the floor. "Waiting," he said. "For what?" Boone looked up. "For one of us to step outside." Morning did not bring relief. When the first light crept through the cracks in the cabin walls, it felt weak and distant, like it didn't belong in that part of the forest. The men inside hadn't slept. Some sat frozen where they had been all night. Others paced quietly, too afraid to stay still for long. Sheriff Elias Boone stood near the door, staring at the wooden beam that kept it shut. He hadn't moved in hours. The sound from the night before, the slow, deliberate thunk of the axe, still echoed in his mind. But now, there was nothing. No footsteps. No wind. No birds. Just silence. "We leave now," Jacob said, his voice hoarse. "We don't wait any more." No one argued this time. Even Boone didn't object. They had stayed too long. Seen too much. And whatever was out there had made it clear, it wasn't in a hurry. That was the most terrifying part. They removed the beam from the door. For a moment, no one touched it. Then Boone stepped forward and pushed it open. The forest stood still before them. Fog lingered low to the ground, curling between the trees like something alive. The air was colder than it should have been. Heavy. Thick. But there was no sign of the woodsman. No sign of anything. "Stay close," Boone said quietly. They moved quickly, retracing their steps as best they could. The problem was, nothing looked familiar anymore. The trees seemed different. The paths they thought they had taken were gone. Even the marks they had noticed before had vanished. "This isn't right," one of the men muttered. "We came from this direction." "I know we did." Boone didn't respond. Because he wasn't sure anymore. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, but its light barely reached them. The forest swallowed it, turning everything into shades of gray and shadow. Then something strange happened. They found the carvings again. The same twisted shapes. The same tall figure with the axe. But now, there were more of them. Far more. Every tree they passed seemed marked. And the figures carved into them were no longer standing still. They were closer together. Clustered. Like they were gathering. Jacob stopped suddenly. "Look," he said, pointing ahead. The others followed his gaze, and froze. There, between the trees, stood a figure. Then another. And another. Dozens of them. Standing in silence. Boone's chest tightened. The missing hikers. The searchers. All of them. Exactly as he had seen before. Unmoving. Unblinking. Watching. "No," one of the men whispered. "No, this isn't real." But it was. Every detail. Every face. Pale. Empty. Then, slowly, one of the figures moved. Just slightly. A tilt of the head. A shift in posture. The men staggered back. "They're alive," Jacob said, his voice trembling. Boone shook his head. "Not like we are." The forest grew colder. Darker. And then, thunk. The sound came from behind them. Closer than ever. They turned. And this time, he was there. The woodsman stood only a few yards away. No fog hiding him now. No distance between them. He was taller than Boone remembered. His body seemed wrong, too still, too solid, like he was carved from the same wood as the trees around him. His beard hung thick and tangled. His clothes were stitched from rough, uneven materials, pieces that didn't seem to belong together. And in his hand, the axe. No one moved. No one spoke. The woodsman lifted his head slightly. And for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't human. It wasn't even natural. It stretched too far. Too wide. Jacob raised his rifle. "I'll stop him," he said, though his voice shook. Boone reached out. "Don't." But it was too late. The gun fired. The sound exploded through the forest. Birds should have scattered. Echoes should have followed. But neither happened. The bullet hit the woodsman directly in the chest. And did nothing. He didn't flinch. Didn't step back. Didn't even blink. Jacob froze. "No, no, that's not possible." The woodsman took one step forward. Slow. Heavy. Thunk. The sound didn't come from the axe. It came from his foot hitting the ground. Then everything happened at once. The figures in the trees began to move. Not quickly. Not violently. But steadily. Closing in. The men panicked. Some ran. Some fired their weapons wildly. But it didn't matter. The forest swallowed them. Boone tried to run, but something caught his leg. He fell hard to the ground, the air knocked from his lungs. When he looked up, the woodsman was standing over him. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Boone expected pain. Violence. The end. But instead, the woodsman lowered his axe. And pointed. Not at Boone. But toward the trees. Boone turned his head. And saw them. All of them. Standing there. Waiting. A terrible understanding filled his mind. The woodsman didn't need to kill him. The forest would decide. Everything went dark. Weeks later, Sheriff Elias Boone was found wandering near the edge of the mountains. Alone. Barefoot. Covered in dirt and scratches. He didn't speak at first. Didn't respond to questions. Didn't seem to recognize anyone. When he finally began to talk, his words came slowly. Broken. "They're still there," he said. "Still standing. Still waiting." Authorities searched the area again. But they found nothing. No cabin. No carvings. No trail. It was as if the forest had erased everything. Boone's journal was recovered. Hidden beneath his coat. Its final entry read, "This place doesn't take lives. It keeps them. He doesn't hunt. He feeds the woods." The official report blamed wild animals. Exposure. Panic. The case was closed. Quietly. Maps were changed. Records disappeared. The trail was removed completely. But some locals still talk about it. In low voices. Late at night. They say if you go deep enough into the Appalachian woods, far beyond the marked paths, you might find a place where the forest feels wrong. Where the air grows heavy. Where the trees stand too close together. And if you listen carefully, you might hear it. Thunk. 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 Slow. Steady. Waiting. And if you follow that sound, you won't come back.